Hi there. This is the NFL DFS build. I'm Kevin Roberts. I will be looking at the Saturday slate for DraftKings for this week. First set of games for the Super Wildcard weekend. Not the most appealing slate, obviously, because there's only 2 games, and also because kind of only one of them looks very appealing. Both these games actually have pretty much the same total, but you're looking at the second best scoring offense in the Miami Dolphins coming to Kansas City. So just based off of their explosive ability, I would imagine that's going to be the most stackable game. Ownership projections are not out yet, so I'm not really going to play the guessing game as far as like who's going to be chalky and all that too much. I'm just going to run through each position and give you my thoughts on who I like. My personal approach for this type of slate is not to go really hard and to not mass enter here. I'm probably just doing a single entry, eating some chalk, and then just getting different in a couple spots and hoping that, does the trick. I'd focus more of my efforts and, my cash on the Sunday main slate. So I'm using rotogrinders.com's point projections here. And usually, obviously, they'll have the player ownership too, but right now they don't, so we're not going to mess with that. So starting with quarterbacks, I mean, on paper, everybody looks pretty good. So I would probably let the ownership sway me considerably here. Mahomes appears to have the best matchup in theory. The Miami Dolphins have been not good against fantasy quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks. And on the year, they are the 11th worst. So it looks like, through the air is where Kansas City is going to have their success, if they're going to have any at all. I would expect them to have success. I expect this to be a shootout. So by comparison, I'm probably leaning towards that game to where I pick my quarterback. I will note that Joe Flacco does look good, because if you look at the projections here, he's the second best quarterback in terms of projection. He looks awesome based off points per dollar. He saves you money at only 6.1K. So Flacco is very, very appealing on a 2-game slate, but I do question if he's going to be really chalky because of that reason. So of the lot, I'm probably looking at Mahomes. He's got the best matchup. He's at home. He's got something to prove. He still has some good weapons in Kelsey and Rashee Rice. But I also like Tua on the other side, and we'll see what ownership shows us. So at running back, Isaiah Pacheco comes in with an 18 fantasy point projection, which I feel like could be a little bit inflated based off his last game where he got 32 fantasy points in the Week 17 game against the Bengals. So he's actually been awesome lately. He's had 24-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. So, and he's not even expensive, only 6.4K, so you can't just ignore him. But on paper, the Dolphins have not been a very good matchup for running backs. On the season, they have a top 10 defense against fantasy backs. So, and then if you look back and see how he did in that matchup earlier this year, let's see, 6.6 fantasy points. Obviously, one matchup earlier in the regular season doesn't really tell us anything, but just something worth noting. Excuse me. So the reason for potentially fading Pacheco here would be that he ends up being really chalky. And obviously, as the top projecting running back, he's at home, he's favored, he's been in great form. All those reasons make him a good play. But if he's going to be crazy owned, I think it might make sense to leverage that with a Chiefs passing stack, and then you just don't play him. I think you can still incorporate him into a Chiefs stack too. But right off the bat, without knowing ownership, I'm actually pretty interested in fading him. And a good reason for that is because I don't really want to play a lot of running backs in general on this slate. And I think the Cleveland-Houston game kind of sets up more as a slugfest. So I'd probably be looking at 1 or 2 of the backs there. Or I would look at the other side where the Chiefs' pass defense is typically stingier, and the best way to beat them right now is on the ground. Let's see, if you look at how they're performing, by the numbers, they've been pretty decent on the ground. But when you look at somebody like Devon Achane and his explosive ability, I just think he could end up being a really good GPP play, especially compared to somebody like Isaiah Pacheco if he ends up being chalky. Like I said, I don't want to get too much into the ownership conversation just because we don't know yet how things project. But if you're asking me, I'm looking probably at Jerome Ford, maybe Devin Singletary, and maybe Achane, and probably picking from those three guys without knowing ownership. Wide receiver is going to be really interesting because Tyreek Hill is far and away the best top-end spend here. And there's nobody else that you really have to commit major funds to. He was not very good earlier in the year against the Chiefs. There is the argument that, like I said, KC can be good against the pass. They know Tyreek Hill. He's on the road. The Dolphins may look to establish a run. It's still Tyreek Hill, though. Tyreek Hill can, pay off in one play. So I don't think it's not a slate with like a ton of amazing options either. So I don't think I want to fade Tyreek Hill. I think when you're looking at guys who project the best, you're looking at Pacheco, Tyreek Hill, Nico Collins. I think Tyreek Hill is the guy I wouldn't fade. I think it'll be interesting to see what his ownership is just because he's pretty expensive, but I would imagine he ends up being rather owned. Going down to Nico Collins, I got no problem with him just based off of a pretty good price compared to Tyreek Hill. He projects very well. Obviously, no Tank Dell for Houston, so he's going to get fed targets. It's not really the best matchup, and obviously it's a playoff game, so everything's kind of heightened. And if you look at how teams have been performing against the pass, the Browns, have been pretty good lately, and on the year extremely stingy against wide receivers. They rank as the fourth worst matchup for wide receivers on the year. So you certainly could argue for fading Nico Collins and maybe using like an ancillary piece from the Texans like Dalton Schultz or their running back or Noah Brown. There's a lot of questionable guys on the slate, particularly with Houston. So, those guys could come into play as interesting options if you end up fading Nico. But like I said, there's not a lot of crazily priced guys on the slate. There's not a lot of guys with awesome upside. So Nico Collins remains in play. It just the matchup isn't really that good. Working down the list, you got Amari Cooper totally in play. Much better matchup than Nico has. Kind of a pivot in terms of price. He's a little bit banged up, but the last time he played, he went absolutely bonkers. I think, he had 54 fantasy points, so that'll do. Obviously, don't expect a repeat of that. But to be fair, that was against the Texans, so it does look like a promising matchup for him. Like I said, I like Flacco on this slate, so if I'm playing Flacco, I'm definitely playing Amari. And even if I don't play Flacco, just because it's so easy to get guys on this slate, Amari is very much on my radar. And based on his recent comments, it doesn't sound like he'll be limited whatsoever. Jalen Waddle is fine as part of a Miami stack. He'd be a pretty good play off of a chalky, a pretty good leverage play off of a chalky Tyreek Hill possibly. And like I said, the Miami KC game in general looks good. I love Rashee Rice in this spot. And then you work down the list here. There's some pretty good value. Elijah Moore looks pretty good. Noah Brown could be interesting, assuming he's at full strength. Other guys it gets pretty ugly after that, but you do want to find a way to save some cash here. So, the Chiefs are a little bit banged up with, I think Kadarius Toney is out. Let's see, he's limited participant, so he actually probably will play. He is 3.2K, so he could be out there and get about as much run as Justin Watson or Richie James. I'm not super eager to use any of these Chiefs punts, but I will note that Sky Moore is on injured reserve. I think Justin Ross is also banged up. So just check the injury report, see who's actually playing. Any of those Chiefs punts are on the table, but do you feel good about them? Not exactly. Jalen Waddle should play and is a good play. So his presence probably eliminates my interest in the likes of Cedric Wilson and Braxton Berrios. So really for value at wide receiver, I'm probably sticking with Noah Brown, maybe Robert Woods if he plays, and probably Elijah Moore. Because 4K for Elijah Moore, the guy who gets a pretty good amount of targets when he plays, looks pretty good. He was injured. He had a concussion after playing against the Jets, but he should be full go and should be ready to rock. So tight end is a little bit interesting. I'm really interested to see what the ownership is going to be here. It's a little bit unexpected walking into a playoff scenario or just a DFS slate in general and look at either split ownership possibly or weighted ownership going toward David Njoku over Travis Kelce. But hey, that's the world we're living in here. It's not crazy to fade Travis Kelce at this point. Travis Kelce has not been that dude. He just hasn't. Compared to other tight ends he has, but his last 3 games, he has not topped 10 fantasy points. He hasn't topped 15 fantasy points since week 12. He hasn't topped 20 fantasy points since week 7. So whatever the case, if you're thinking into the Taylor Swift narrative, you're thinking he's just getting old or, washed or whatever, he hasn't been that dude. So it is a little bit concerning. So I can understand maybe wanting to fade him, but he is still Travis Kelce. It's a home game. This game has major potential, especially compared to the other game. And on the season, Miami is the bottom 10 defense against tight ends. So if Kelce is going to be under-owned as the top projecting tight end, yeah, I'm going to play Kelce. If it is flipped and everybody buys into it's Travis Kelce hype, then I would start looking to Njoku. I think this is mostly a ownership play because Njoku has an even better matchup against the Houston defense. Let's see actually how he performed in that last game. Yeah, 21 fantasy points. He's been awesome. He's had 21 plus fantasy points in 3 of the last 4, 16 plus in all of the last 4 games he played. So this dude is on a heater. Massive game for the Browns, obviously, who think they can do a lot more than win just 1 game. I will mention the only other guy that I'm looking at would be Dalton Schultz. I think he's fine, but it's really between Kelce and Njoku. I hope it's not split ownership. I hope the field gets really confident in one of them, and we can get one of them at low ownership. Lastly, we can look at defense. It's a crapshoot. They're all priced at 3.3K or less. Nobody's like a mega punt here. I would not be targeting the Chiefs or Dolphins defense. If you're doing cash games, I think one of them actually is pretty interesting in GPPs because this is the game that has the most offensive upside. This is the game that should have the most scoring. So I would probably lean that way. And honestly, Miami is the cheapest defense. I would probably, if I'm looking to save cash and get as many studs in as possible, I would just go with Miami because they have exhibited upside on the season, and they've been the better team than the Chiefs, and they're coming in as the underdog, so they probably have a chip on their shoulder. On paper, though, the best play is the Browns, and they're the most expensive for that reason. They're facing a rookie quarterback. They are probably a lot better than this setup suggests. I mean, they're the road team only because Houston won their trash division. So Cleveland's probably the better team. They have a much better defense, and their price is such. So that is how I would look at this slate. Overall, I'm probably targeting the Miami-KC game as much as possible. I'm probably looking at Patrick Mahomes and working in a stack of Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce. The only thing is we don't have the projections yet for ownership to know what kind of take we're having against the field. But hopefully I'm giving you a little bit of insight as to which plays stand out for me. In general, not a lot of crazy good value. That is why I would probably be saving maybe with the defense, possibly. I think because it would be a little bit contrarian to stack Chiefs and then run back with the Miami defense. And honestly, it's such a crapshoot on the tiny slate. I don't think that's a bad idea. And then you could save with somebody like Elijah Moore and then maybe punt both the running back positions. Sorry, got to clear my throat. But yeah, hopefully this helped you out, and good luck on Saturday.